Every account in this archive records a decision. This one does not. Everything the Concord has ever learned about this species, we have learned from a moment someone chose. A refusal, a promise kept past the point of reason. This file has no such moment in it, and that is the reason it almost didn't clear review. Access granted. File 003, recorded at contact +19 by Analyst Sennet Vahl of the Ithran, assigned to Biological Baseline Survey. The least glamorous posting the Concord issues, and the longest. Vahl's predecessors opened this survey 212 years before humanity knew we existed. The Concord holds a model for a species that destroys what is precious to it in exchange for something it wants. We hold a model for a species that protects what is precious to it at cost to itself. We have used both models to predict 11 species with acceptable accuracy. File 003 does not fit either. Analyst Vahl's account is short. She submitted it 4 times. I will begin with what a baseline specimen is, because the loss does not read as a loss without it. A long baseline survey does not measure a planet. It measures change. To do that, you need one thing that does not change. A fixed point you return to every season, so that everything else can be described in relation to it. On this survey grid, that fixed point was a tree. Concord designation. Baseline specimen 7. Confirmed age by core sample. 4,140 years. It was the oldest continuously living organism inside the survey boundary, and it had been measured, photographed, and cored by my service every season since the grid opened. 231 years of continuous observation. Every observation this survey has ever filed is expressed as a variance from specimen 7. I record for the file that the humans had already named it. They called it Old Meg. I do not know why, and no human I observed knew either. A public house 2 miles down the valley was named after it. Children were photographed against it on the first day of each school year, and those photographs were kept. 2 people I observed had been photographed against it as children, and had brought their own children to be photographed in the same position. This matters to the account. The tree was not unknown to them. It was not unloved. Those are the 2 conditions under which our models predict destruction, and neither of them applied. I catalogued what the humans had left on it and in it, because a survey specimen is measured in full. Names cut into the bark, some old enough that the wood had grown most of the way back over them. A metal plate screwed in low, dedicating a bench nobody had built to a man named in the inscription. I could not determine whether the bench was ever intended or whether the plate was the whole of the memorial. I recorded 11 proposals of marriage at that location across my service, 3 of them successful by my own observation, the outcomes of the others unknown to me. I recorded what a local minister confirmed was the customary place for a first kiss among adolescents in the village school, a fact he offered without my asking for it. I recorded 41 distinct family picnics in a single season, contact +9, the highest count on the grid. None of this is unusual for a specimen that has anchored one survey grid for 231 years. A fixed point accumulates a human record the way it accumulates its own rings. I note it here because the loss was not the loss of an unremarked object. It was catalogued on both sides in parallel for as long as either of us was counting. At contact +11, a regional authority granted consent for a road widening scheme. The consent documentation listed the tree's age as approximately 400 years. A round number estimate carried unchallenged in local records since long before my service began. Nothing in the consent process required anyone to verify it. At contact +14, a human researcher took a core sample and replaced that estimate with the figure already on record here, 4,000 140 years. 10 times the age the consent had been granted against. She published. The figure was reported widely. There were objections, a petition, and a locally organized campaign that I assessed as competent and sincere. Nothing happened. I want to be precise, because this is the part I could not model. The objections were not refused. No authority reviewed the corrected age and decided it was insufficient. No individual weighed 4,000 years against a road and chose the road. What I observed instead was that the consent, once granted, had no mechanism by which it could be ungranted. New information had no route into the process. The process was not hostile to the information. It simply had nowhere to put it. I attempted to locate the office capable of halting it. I traced the authority through 9 separate human administrative bodies over 11 months. Each body was procedurally correct. Each held a document issued by another body that obliged it to proceed. I did not find a decision anywhere in the chain. I want that recorded plainly. I looked for 4 months longer than my posting required, and there was no decision to find. At Contact, +18, I filed a request for limited intervention, permission to deposit the survey record with a human institution, or to make the age known through any channel available to me. The request was refused. Non-interference consent for this grid was granted at Contact -212 and contains no provision for amendment. I noted the similarity. I did not include the note in my first submission. Before the date, I searched our own archive for precedent on the assumption that a species behaving this way would have been recorded doing it before and that a recommendation would exist, which I could cite. I found it in 90 minutes. Grid 4, Contact -60. A baseline specimen of comparable standing, not a tree, a shallow lake, drained under a human agricultural consent issued 9 years earlier, after the consenting authority had been informed of the specimen's status and had acknowledged receipt of that information in writing. The account is 900 words long. It is competent. Its closing recommendation asks that the Concord establish a procedure permitting baseline analysts to disclose specimen status to a host species where imminent loss is assessed as certain. The recommendation was received, logged, and assessed as out of scope for the reviewing body, with a note directing it to a committee. I was unable to establish that the committee convened. The recommendation has been in the file for 79 years, and I am the first analyst to request access to it. I record that I did not find this comforting. I had gone looking for an instrument and found a second instance of the same event, correctly filed. The removal took place at Contact, +19 on schedule, on a Tuesday morning in 40 minutes. I observed 6 humans. None of them was cruel. One of them photographed the tree before starting on a personal device, and I assessed the act as sincere. One said aloud that it was a shame. Another agreed with him. Then they did it. And then they had lunch in the vehicle with the doors open because the weather had turned fine. Afterwards, I collected accounts of why. I obtained 3. The first held that the permit required removal and they had no discretion. The second held that the tree was diseased. It was not. I had cored it 11 weeks earlier, and it was sound. The third said that he had been told to, and that he had assumed someone had checked. 3 accounts. No agreement. I could not identify an author. I closed the account with the operational consequence, which is the part my service will care about, and the part I find I cannot separate from the rest of it. The road scheme was cancelled 8 months later for reasons of funding. The widening was never carried out. The road is the width it was. And 231 years of measurement now have no fixed point. Every variance this survey has ever filed was expressed against specimen 7. Without it, the observations are not wrong. They are simply no longer measurements of anything. Analyst Vahl submitted this account 4 times. 3 submissions were returned to her for the removal of material assessed as non-observational. Specifically, the paragraph in which she records having looked 4 months longer than her posting required, and the single line in which she notes a similarity. She resubmitted it unchanged on each occasion. It is in the file as she wrote it. The Concord has spent 19 years trying to establish what humanity wants, on the assumption that a species which wants something can be predicted. File 003 is the first account in this archive to suggest we have been asking the wrong question. The tree was not traded for the road. There was no road. It was not destroyed by anyone who wanted it gone. It was destroyed by a process that could not be told anything. We have no model for that. Our models require an author. Filed under procedurally correct.